Grant Kleiman from Darsana Martial Arts, and in this video I'm going to discuss some of the debates around punching in the martial arts community. One of those debates is whether or not you should be punching at all in a street fight or self-defense scenario, or whether it's preferable to be using open hand palm strikes. Now, mostly this debate is about safety, about the risk of injury, and also about the amount of training that it takes to be able to punch properly versus the amount of training it takes to be able to use a palm strike properly. So let's start with safety. Proponents of palm striking in a street fight will often cite that because there's more surface area on the palm and because there's more flesh on the palm, you're less likely to break the hand, that you can take a lot of impact spread across this surface area on the palm of your hand, much more than you can take to the knuckles without injury. They'll also cite that maintaining an alignment for striking with the palm is easier than maintaining the alignment of your wrist when striking with any of the knuckles. They will also usually say that if you're punching with the knuckles, particularly to the face, that you have a higher level chance of cutting open the skin and sharing fluid, where they would say that you have less of a chance of doing that because there's a lot more between the bone and the skin here, making it less likely to break open and cut. Many of them, I think, will wisely say that you can do both. However, if you are more of a beginner in the martial arts, your training has just started and you really haven't trained your punching, that you're safer with a palm strike. And I would tend to agree with that. I think that if you're punching but you haven't trained it, there's no conditioning, and I'm not talking about hardening of the knuckles, but I'm talking about the muscles surrounding the wrist and creating stability and a certain understanding and confidence with which knuckles you're landing with that work for you. So if that's the case, I do think a palm strike is a better option, just because it is easier to do this than it is to do this without injuring your wrist, and you're also less likely potentially to break any bones. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean you can't injure yourself doing a palm strike. Because of the bend in the wrist when you're doing a palm strike, that if you strike with anything but the heel of the palm, preferably with this sort of outer corner or wedge shape of the palm, anywhere above that, you are likely to create a good bit of leverage on the wrist, and then you can compress and damage the joint of the wrist or hyperextend the connective tissue, the tendon inside of the wrist. I would also say that because the fingers are extended, that there's more likelihood for them to get caught and snagged, the thumb to get caught and snagged. So as far as breaking open the skin, if I'm striking with a palm strike and I get just the right angle, it's not a hard thing for me to cut open my palm on your upper teeth, bottom teeth, or depending on the angle of the strike. So I think it is an easier strike to use, at least for striking to the head. And I believe that it's probably safer for a beginner to strike with an open hand than it is with a fist, at least for the wrist and possibly for their bones, because they haven't yet educated the surface on how to strike. However, I don't think the palm strike is magically safer. Matter of fact, I think that anytime you strike with any part of the body, there's a risk of injury, because no part of our body evolved specifically as a blunt instrument. What we evolved is bigger, smarter brains and more coordinated, sophisticated hands that we can use to make weapons. And that is our species' primary mode of self-defense. While that is true, it's also true that weapons are not appropriate for every self-defense scenario. So if you're using empty hands, palm strike is a good option. But if you've trained it and you have confidence in that surface and in that alignment, there's good argument why the fist is better. Because the palm is softer and spreads over a larger surface area, you are not going to get as much impact, as much penetration in the strike. When you have something that is both smaller in area and harder, meaning that it yields less upon impact, that means more of the force is going to be communicated to the target when you strike. So in my opinion, the fist is overall a more damaging tool, and once you've trained it, it is relatively as safe as using a palm strike. Moreover, I think it's an easier tool to use to strike to different areas. If you are striking with the fist is essentially an extension of the forearm bones. And so you can poke it into openings and holes from different angles. With the palm, it's harder to do that because you're going from a surface area that is this big to a surface area that is more than twice that size. It's harder to get in. It also, I think, starts to invite the risk of that hyperextension of the wrist when trying to do a palm strike into tinier openings. I train both open-handed and closed-fisted strikes, and I take students who are beginners and focus on the palm strike and then gradually progress them towards fisted strikes. Now, another big debate in the martial arts community, once you've decided to punch, is which knuckles you should punch with. And people in the martial arts community will fall into a variety of different camps on this. There's the big two-knuckle camp who believe in punching with only the pointer knuckle and middle knuckle. There is the bottom three-knuckle camp who believe in punching with the pinky, ring, and middle knuckle. There is the middle knuckle only camp. There is a subgroup of the three-knuckle camp which focuses just on the bottom two knuckles. And then there is the just punch with all four knuckles camp. And they all have different points of view, and I think they all have good points to make. But in my almost 20 years experience in the martial arts and training, what I've ultimately come to is that you don't need to make a choice. And as a matter of fact, not only do you not need to make a choice, but I think what you'll find is different punches require different sets of knuckles in order to align the power properly to the target. Because what it's really going to be dependent upon is the distance to the target, which means the punch will extend more or less, the angle to the target, meaning whether you're coming from up to down to up, is it vertical, is it horizontal, is it diagonal, and then the vector of force. Are you aligning your bones along the vector of force that you're generating? And is that vector of force hitting perpendicular to the target, or is it hitting at an off angle? And finally, the target itself, because the target is going to have different shape and different density. It could be a rounder target, it could be a somewhat flatter target, a narrower target, a broader target. The target can have a steep angle, the target can be flat up and down, it can be very hard and solid, the target could be much softer, the target could be moving, and the target could be not moving. It could be moving away from you, and it could be moving towards you. All of these factors will change or influence how your knuckles are going to land and which knuckles are going to land with alignment, with power. So rather than focusing on the pure physicality of which knuckles are the best knuckles to punch with or the safest knuckles to punch with, what's worked for me is to focus on my intention, to focus on stabbing my knuckles into the target. It's not something that I consciously decided, when I do this punch, I'm going to punch with these knuckles and this punch with these knuckles. Whatever knuckles best line up to that target at that angle, at that distance, and with that vector of force, those are the knuckles that I'm lining up throughout my structure. To me, the whole argument about choosing which knuckles to punch with is kind of a moot point, because at the end of the day, it's whichever knuckles best line up to the target. If you try to hit with the same knuckles all the time, every time you punch, then you're probably going to end up injuring yourself because they may not be the appropriate knuckles. So anytime you don't end up lining up the vector of force and the alignment of your bones perpendicular to your target, what's going to end up happening is, if you're at an off angle and the force is going this way, it's going to seek an escape out through your joints, and that's where you're likely to get injured. But through training, you can reduce the risk of injury. So my recommendation to you is hit a lot of things at a lot of different distances and a lot of different angles. Humans are not hard, flat surfaces. We are round. We are made up of a lot of different planes. Some bones are very close to the surface of the body and very hard. Other bones are more soft and flexible. Others less close to the surface of the body, surrounded by more meat. So when you're punching, people, you're generally not going to be landing on that perfect flat surface to find that alignment anyways. But the more times you hit something and you align to targets, the better. Another big debate is whether your punches should be vertical, horizontal, or spiral through to the point of even turning over. To me, again, it's one of those moot point arguments, because the answer is yes, all three. And to me, it's again about distance. So in general, when I punch with a spiral. However, depending on how close the target is to me, and again, the angle of the punch, it's going to end up being a vertical punch, a 45-degree punch, a horizontal punch, an overturned punch. And I'm just showing you a straight punch. Again, when I'm doing different types of punches, different ranges, again, it's going to be a different amount of turn or torque through the punch. So my punch will be a vertical punch sometimes if I'm doing short punches very close, and it's going to be a vertical punch. If I am a little bit further away, it's going to be this sort of 45-degree angle punch. If I'm getting a little bit further, it's going to come all the way out to a horizontal punch, and then it's going to twist over. And it's the same thing for me with a hook. I could be doing a really short hook right here, where it's sort of a shovel hook coming up under the chin, or like this. Now it's gone from sort of 45 degrees up to horizontal. If it's a little further away, a lot of times my fist will start to turn over, and now it's 45 degrees down. Sometimes if it's a little further away, it'll be like that. Now I'm landing with these knuckles. And if it's much further away, particularly if I'm punching over the top of a target, then my hand is going to rotate over like this, and it goes from being sort of a tighter hook to almost an overhand straight. Rather than focusing on which one of these options is right and which one of these options is wrong, instead see where they all fit, where they're all right. Now, the reason this is a debate is because, first of all, everybody has natural preferences, because we're all a little bit different. We're all built a little bit different. We all have a little bit of a different fighting style, and certain things work better for us because it just fits us better as a person and as a martial artist. Second of all, it's a debate because every single one of the things I've discussed has worked really well for someone, and it has failed somebody really badly. Somebody has knocked people out time after time with their palm strike, or their preferred set of knuckles, or with their vertical punch, or their horizontal punch, or their twisting punch. Somebody has injured themselves with their palm strike, or what they thought was their preferred set of knuckles, or a vertical punch didn't have the power they wanted, or a horizontal punch tweaked their wrist, or a twisting punch tweaked their shoulder. So the point is that none of these ways is universally right, none of them is universally wrong. It all depends partially on you, partially on how and when you use it. So take all of these things and experiment with them. Train consistently, train mindfully, train safely. And that just means take things slow at first. Don't start wailing on a heavy bag or a bob or a mukjang or whatever your preferred apparatus of practice is. Start out pushing into it. Start out tapping it, particularly if you're experimenting with a new style of punch, or with a new angle of punch, or a new distance, or a different set of knuckles, and you're trying to see what fits best. Nothing is a better teacher than experience, especially if that experience is gradual and gives you time to learn from it. Now, ultimately, you won't have to think about it because you will have trained your body. You will have trained your nervous system to know which surface lines up at what angle, how much to turn, etc. Yet one more big debate about punching in the martial arts community is whether or not the fist should be held tightly closed, whether it should be held loose or open and then squeezed upon impact, or whether or not the fist should be kept fairly loose and relaxed the entire time. Those who advocate keeping the fist closed tightly will say that it's safer, that keeping the wrist aligned and the knuckles aligned will maintain the structure in the hand and wrist so that you can strike with maximum impact and minimum risk of injury. Those who advocate keeping the hands open or loose and squeezing upon impact will sometimes say that the squeeze on impact adds power, that keeping the hands loose will help you to move more quickly, and also that if you're keeping the hands open, it allows you to do more things with them like parry or grasp, so that the hand is more versatile, and by squeezing it quickly when throwing a punch, then you can still punch and do all of those other things. Those who advocate keeping the hand loose and relaxed the entire time when striking will say that any antagonistic tension to the direction of force of the punch will slow it down and rob you of power. Therefore, you don't want to create any tension in the hand, the wrist, the forearm, etc., but rather that you want to keep it loose and strike. Now, I've experimented training with all of these different perspectives. I've trained to keep the fist squeezed tightly. I've trained to only squeeze it at the point of impact, and I've trained keeping it loose and relaxed the entire time. I've found that keeping the fist closed tightly doesn't necessarily create antagonistic tension unless you're over squeezing and over tense, and it can offer a firm structure. I found that keeping the hand open and then only squeezing it closed at the point of impact does indeed help with a relaxed, quicker arm, as well as making the hand more versatile. However, I have found that there's a possibility you may not get the fist aligned in time. Finally, I have found that it is possible to keep the hand and wrist and arm relatively relaxed and still punch with a lot of power and good alignment, but it's also possible to try to keep the hand relaxed and punch and have it too loose so that you deform the hand, deform the wrist, and possibly injure yourself on impact. So what does this mean? It means that there is, again, no one right way to do it, that each way of doing it has its potential benefits and its potential pitfalls, and I recommend training in all of them so that you can get a feeling for the spectrum of the different possibilities. In my own practice, I do keep the hand closed, but I will often keep it relatively loose and relaxed. And what I tend to do actually, especially when hitting the heavy bag, is I will tend to actually keep these fingers slightly extended and not completely curled in. I do, however, have a certain degree of tension in the muscles of my hand between my knuckles and wrist and forearm to keep everything aligned. But what happens for me personally, when I squeeze my fist, the middle knuckle of my pointer finger will protrude a little bit. And so sometimes when punching, I'll end up hitting with this knuckle, or these fingers will just sort of get in the way. But if I keep them slightly relaxed, and I'm only relaxing at that joint, but I'm keeping everything else nice and aligned and with a certain firmness, when I punch, I'm able to hit with a lot of power and a lot of impact. And if these fingers get in the way, they just end up yielding and pushing to the side, helping the knuckles to protrude a little bit further. Now, this isn't something that I consciously decided to do and then went ahead and trained it, but rather it's something that evolved through that experimentation and what I ultimately found worked best for me. And so I'm able to strike the heavy bag full power, and my wrist maintains alignment. I land with good alignment through my knuckles, and my fingers don't get in the way. That may not be the right way for you. Now, if we're talking about a trajectory of training and you're just getting started, probably your safest bet is to squeeze your fist, curl the fingers tightly. But what I would do is I would say don't squeeze it too tight where you begin to deform these two knuckles inward, but rather sort of curl them backward so that these knuckles come back like this and they don't squeeze forward and they maintain alignment. Now, personally, I like to put my thumb against the side of my pointer finger. Some people would like to fold it over. I would just say don't wrap it too far, because this actually begins to stretch the connective muscles from the thumb to the wrist, and I find that it makes the wrist weaker. So actually pulling that thumb back a little bit to just be in front of the pointer finger or connected to the side, I find that to be personally a little bit more stable in my wrist. But that being said, Once you start to find the alignment of your knuckles and you understand those bones and you can hit and you've hit a lot, then you can begin to experiment with opening the hand, moving a little bit faster and only closing it and getting to that right alignment on impact. And then from there, I would start to experiment with relaxing the fingers, but keeping alignment through the knuckles, bones of the hand and forearms, and striking like that, and just see where it takes you. Now, I will say that ultimately when punching, I find that the more you can relax and let that kinetic chain of force travel through your punch, you can generate more and more power. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Now go practice.